There are feelings that do not disappear when they are ignored. They simply fall silent, hidden behind a smile, automatic responses, and the appearance that everything is fine. Billy Graham observed how many people learn to move forward by pretending balance, while unexpressed emotions continue to grow inside. This is a reflection on that silent effort to appear well, even when something internal is being constantly repressed. Pretending that everything is fine is usually not a conscious choice. Most of the time it is an adaptation. Little by little, a person learns that showing certain emotions can create discomfort, conflict, or judgment. So they adjust. They silence what they feel, arrange their expression, choose neutral words, and keep functioning. This behavior is socially valued, being strong, balanced, resilient, not complaining, not showing weakness. And outwardly, it works. Life goes on. Responsibilities are fulfilled. Relationships continue. But inside, something begins to accumulate. Repressed feelings do not disappear because they find no space. They simply stop being expressed. Emotions such as frustration, sadness, fear, or fatigue are pushed into an internal place where they do not cause immediate disturbance. The problem is that this place is not neutral. It becomes a silent reservoir. Over time, the person no longer notices that they are repressing. Pretending to be fine becomes automatic. A smile appears without conscious effort. The answer, "I'm fine," comes out naturally, and in this way, contact with what is truly felt gradually weakens. This conflict is silent because it does not alter external functioning. The person remains productive, present, responsible. There are no obvious signs of suffering, and precisely because of that, no one asks. And when no one asks, the silence deepens. Many people confuse emotional repression with maturity. They believe that controlling what they feel is a sign of balance. But when there is no space for expression, emotions do not resolve. They accumulate, and the longer they remain stored, the more force they gain. Repressed feelings begin to appear in other ways: an irritation with no clear cause, a fatigue that cannot be explained, a constant sense of heaviness, not as major outbursts, but as small cracks in daily life. Pretending to be fine also creates an inner distance. The person begins to observe their own life from the outside. They act as if they are playing a role. They do what needs to be done, but feel that something is not being lived authentically. This pattern is reinforced because it works in the short term. It avoids conflict, maintains order, preserves relationships. But in the long term, it demands an internal price. Feelings that find no expression continue to exist, and without being acknowledged, grow in silence. Billy Graham observed that many people live like this for years, not because they chose repression, but because they learned that this was the safest way to move forward. The problem is not pretending to be fine in a specific moment. The problem is when this becomes the primary way of existing. This is the central conflict, maintaining an appearance of balance while inside, unexpressed emotions accumulate and gain strength. A silent process, difficult to notice, but deeply exhausting. Billy Graham observed this behavior with an attentive and deeply human glad. For him, the problem was not controlling occasional emotions, but living constantly disconnected from what one truly feels. When a person learns to hide emotions as a rule, something internal begins to quietly fall out of order. He noticed that many people confuse peace with the absence of visible conflict. They maintain the appearance of balance, avoid difficult conversations, and move forward believing that this is maturity. But in Billy Graham's view, this posture can create a dangerous distance between the person and their own inner life. According to his observation, repressed feelings do not dissolve over time. They remain active, even when they are not acknowledged. The mind may learn to ignore them, but the body and consciousness continue to register this accumulation. And the longer they go without expression, the harder they become to understand when they finally emerge. Billy Graham saw that pretending to be fine often comes from a fear of burdening others or appearing weak. The person adapts to what is expected of them. They learn to answer, "I'm fine," even when they are not, and little by little they begin to believe their own response. For him, this process was not a sign of strength, but of emotional survival, an attempt to keep life functioning without making room for what feels too uncomfortable to express. The problem arises when this strategy stops being temporary and becomes a way of life. Billy Graham observed that when emotions are repressed for a long time, they tend to manifest in distorted ways. They do not appear as clear sadness or direct anger, but as constant fatigue, discouragement without an apparent cause, or a persistent sense of inner heaviness. He also noticed that this emotional accumulation affects how a person relates to themselves. Contact with one's own feelings weakens. The person no longer knows exactly what they feel, only that something is not right. And this disconnection creates even more effort to maintain the appearance of balance. In Billy Graham's view, the greatest risk was not the repressed emotion itself, but the gradual distancing from one's own emotional awareness. When someone spends too much time pretending to be fine, they risk losing the ability to recognize when they are not. This perspective was not accompanied by accusations or quick solutions. Billy Graham did not push for confessions or encourage emotional outbursts. He simply pointed out that unacknowledged emotions remain alive, and without space, tend to grow in silence. This view builds trust because it does not judge. It simply reveals a common human pattern, the attempt to keep everything under control on the outside, while on the inside, something is asking for attention. In modern life, pretending to be fine has become almost a requirement for social survival. The fast pace leaves little room for emotional pauses. There are deadlines, responsibilities, expectations, and a constant pressure to keep functioning. Showing vulnerability seems inconvenient, out of place, or even undesirable. Everyday life rewards those who maintain an appearance of balance, those who do not complain, who deliver results, who keep going despite everything. Gradually, the person learns that expressing certain feelings can create discomfort in others, and so they choose emotional silence as a form of adaptation. Billy Graham observed that this pattern is reinforced by a culture of performance. Life becomes measured by how much one can sustain, not by how much one can feel. Being fine turns into an automatic response, even when it no longer matches the inner experience. Social media intensifies this process. Constant exposure to images of organized, happy, well-put-together lives creates a silent contrast. The person feels that they should not feel the way they do, and instead of questioning this model, they hide even more of what they experience inside. At work, this pretending shows up in subtle ways. Emotions are set aside so as not to compromise productivity. Personal problems are kept silent. The person remains present but disconnected, and at the end of the day, they feel a fatigue that cannot be explained only by the tasks completed. Relationships also suffer from this. Conversations become superficial. Automatic responses replace real exchanges. The person is present but not whole. They maintain external harmony while accumulating a growing internal wear. Billy Graham saw that this modern habit of pretending to be fine creates a specific kind of loneliness. Not the loneliness of being without people, but the loneliness of not being truly seen. The person lives among others, yet feels that no one really knows what is happening inside. This emotional accumulation does not cause an immediate collapse. It manifests slowly. A constant discouragement, an irritation with no clear reason, a feeling of always being on edge, even when everything seems under control. Small signs that something has been held back for far too long. Pretending to be fine works as a short-term strategy. It avoids conflict, maintains order, preserves appearances. But over time, this constant effort comes at a cost. Repressed feelings do not disappear. They grow, accumulate, and seek other ways to express themselves. It is in this context that reflection becomes necessary. Not to assign blame, but to notice how the current pace of life encourages emotional silencing. A pattern so common that many no longer realize they are living this way. There are moments when life slows down and the effort to pretend to be fine no longer has anything to lean on. Tasks end, conversations fade, the environment grows quiet. It is in this silence that repressed feelings begin to move more clearly. During the day, they remain contained behind commitments and automatic responses. At night, when there is no one left to convince, they appear, not as an explosion but as weight. a sensation difficult to explain, one that does not demand immediate words. Billy Graham observed that many people fear this silence because it reveals what has been kept under control for too long. When distractions fade, the effort to appear fine loses its strength, and what was repressed begins to take up space. The early hours of the morning intensify this process. The body asks for rest, but the mind remains alert. Emotions arise without a defined shape. There is no clear sadness, no explicit anger. There is only an inner presence insisting on being felt. This silence does not accuse, it does not demand explanations. It simply exposes the cost of having spent the entire day sustaining an image. When appearances fall away, what remains is direct contact with what was avoided. Pretending to be fine works as long as there is movement. When everything stops, the mind can no longer maintain the same control. The repressed feelings that seemed managed reveal that they were only postponed. Billy Graham saw this moment as a point of quiet honesty, not because it brings answers, but because it removes the layers that were hiding what was being lived internally. Silence does not create emotions, it simply removes the filters. There is no need to interpret this moment. It does not ask for analysis or resolution, it simply exists. And perhaps that is exactly what makes it so uncomfortable, because there is no immediate action that makes it disappear. There is a suspension in this space, between the day that has ended and the day that has not yet begun, between the image that was maintained and the real feeling. It is there that many realize that pretending to be fine requires more effort than they imagined. This silence solves nothing, but it shows. And showing is enough to reveal that unexpressed emotions remain alive, even when they seem controlled. When repressed feelings remain unrecognized for a long time, they begin to alter how a person relates to themselves, not explosively, but gradually. Life continues to function, but inner contact becomes more fragile, more distant, more difficult to sustain. Billy Graham observed that this emotional accumulation creates a specific kind of wear. The person does not feel exactly unhappy, but they do not feel whole either. There is a constant sense of internal effort, as if something needs to be kept under control all the time. This effort does not show externally, but it quietly consumes energy. Over time, emotional repression interferes with how one perceives their own life. Emotions become confused. The person no longer knows exactly what they feel, only that something is not right. The body may feel tired for no apparent reason. The mind may feel heavy even on calm days. This state also affects spontaneity. Reacting naturally becomes difficult when there is a constant habit of containment. Emotional responses begin to be filtered before they are even felt. And in this process, the experience of living loses its flow. Billy Graham saw that many people eventually distance themselves from who they are at this point, not out of indifference, but out of protection. Pretending to be fine becomes a way to avoid contact with emotions that feel too overwhelming to face. The problem is that by avoiding this contact, the person also avoids important parts of their own inner life. Ignoring repressed feelings does not neutralize them. They reorganize themselves. They may appear as constant irritation, persistent discouragement, or a vague sense of heaviness that follows the day. There is no clear cause, only a discomfort that does not resolve with rest or distraction. This accumulation also affects how time is experienced. The present becomes something to get through, not something to live. The past holds unresolved emotions. The future is anticipated with tension. The mind rarely finds a space of genuine rest. Billy Graham understood that this wear was not a sign of weakness, but of a prolonged imbalance between what is felt and what is expressed. When emotions are constantly contained, inner life narrows, and the narrower it becomes, the harder it is to feel truly present. None of this happens all at once. It is a slow, almost invisible process, and precisely because of that, it is so common. Many people live this way for years, believing that keeping everything under control is a sign of maturity, when in reality they are only postponing a necessary encounter with themselves. This deepening does not offer solutions. It simply shows the internal cost of pretending to be fine for too long, a cost that does not appear in words or gestures, but that quietly weighs on how life is felt. Perhaps pretending that everything is fine was, for a long time, the only way you found to move forward. Not as a lie, but as an adaptation, a way to keep life functioning without having to deal with everything at once. The problem is not that you did this. The problem is remaining this way for too long. The feelings that were repressed did not disappear. They simply learned to wait. They wait in silence in moments when the effort to appear fine can no longer be sustained. And when they appear, they do not ask for quick explanations. They ask only for recognition. Billy Graham never treated this process as weakness. For him, it was a human sign that something internal needed attention. Not to be fixed immediately, but to stop being ignored. Pretending to be fine may maintain external order, but it carries an internal cost that is not always noticed in time. It is possible that this video did not bring clear answers, and that is intentional, because repressed feelings rarely resolve when they are explained. They transform when they are no longer hidden, and that requires time, presence, and space. I suggest that you subscribe to the channel. By subscribing, you continue to follow reflections that move at this same pace. Human observations, explored with depth, drawn from the ideas of Billy Graham, without haste and without ready-made formulas. If you wish, leave a comment. It can be something simple, a word, a short sentence, something that represents a feeling you usually keep in silence. There's no need to explain too much. Perhaps the most important thing is not to stop pretending immediately, but to notice when that pretending began to feel heavy. Some changes do not happen through abrupt decisions. They happen when what was hidden finally finds space to exist. And perhaps that is what this reflection proposes, not to force a conclusion, but to allow what was repressed to be seen with greater honesty, even if you still don't know what to do with it.